The forest whispered secrets in the half-light of dawn, its ancient pines swaying like silent sentinels guarding truths too wild for human tongues. In a modest cabin nestled at the edge of this untamed expanse, Clara Hennessy knelt by a wicker basket, her breath catching as she peered at the three trembling creatures inside. They were no larger than kittens, their fur a dappled mix of tawny brown and shadow, with eyes like amber moons, wide and unblinking. Bobcat cubs, orphaned by a poacher's careless trap, their mother's body found cold in the underbrush. Clara's heart, weathered by years of solitude, stirred with a fierce, unexpected tenderness. She had no children, no family save the forest itself, and now these fragile lives were hers to cradle. Clara was no stranger to the wild. A former wildlife biologist, she traded sterile labs for this quiet life in the Montana wilderness. Her only companion a grizzled mutt named Sage, whose shaggy coat and soulful eyes belied his knack for sniffing out trouble. It was Sage who'd found the cubs, his low whine drawing Clara to the thicket where they lay, shivering and mewling. She'd carried them home, their tiny claws pricking her palms, and now they were here, in her care, their survival tethered to her hands. Days bled into weeks, and the cubs, whom she named Ember, Dusk, and Thorn, grew under her watchful eye. Ember, the boldest, would pounce on Sage's tail, her tiny growls more comical than fierce. Dusk, the quiet one, preferred to curl against Clara's side, his warmth seeping through her flannel shirt. Thorn, the smallest, was the enigma, his sharp gaze seeming to pierce the veil of the world, as if he saw things Clara could not. Sage, ever patient, became their surrogate, enduring their playful nips and tumbles with a stoic dignity that made Clara laugh until tears streaked her face. The cabin, once a silent refuge, thrummed with life. Clara taught the cubs to hunt, tossing bits of raw venison and watching their instincts flare. She marveled at their grace, the way Ember's leap arced like a crescent moon, or how Dusk's stealth turned him into a shadow among shadows. Thorn, though, hunted with a precision that unnerved her, his strikes too deliberate, his eyes too knowing. At night, she'd sit by the fire, Sage's head in her lap, the cubs sprawled across the hearth, and wonder what she was raising. Were they hers, or did they belong to the wild that pulsed beyond her walls? Months passed, and the cubs grew sleek and powerful, their playful tussles now rattling the cabin's timbers. Clara knew the day was coming when she'd have to release them, but the thought clawed at her. She'd read the signs, the way Ember's ears twitched at distant howls, how Dusk's gaze lingered on the forest's edge, how Thorn's restless pacing carved paths in the dirt floor. Yet she delayed, telling herself they needed more time, more strength. The truth was, she wasn't ready to let go. One frost-rimed morning, as Clara sipped coffee on the porch, Sage's hackles rose. A low growl rumbled from his throat, his gaze fixed on the tree line. Clara followed his stare, her pulse quickening. There, half hidden in the mist, stood a figure. A man lean and weathered, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He carried no weapon, but his presence felt like a blade. "You've got something that don't belong to you," he called, his voice rough as gravel. Clara's grip tightened on her mug. Poachers didn't usually parley, but this one knew about the cubs. "How?" She stood, Sage at her side, and met his gaze. "They're not yours," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her gut. The man smiled, a thin, crooked thing. "Not yet," he said, and vanished into the trees. Clara's breath hitched. She glanced at the cubs, now alert and bristling, their eyes locked on the spot where the man had stood. That night, she barred the door and slept with her father's old rifle by her side. Sage's warmth pressed against her. The cubs didn't sleep. They paced, their claws clicking on the floor, their low growls weaving into the night's uneasy silence. Days later, the first sign of the unexpected came. Clara woke to find Thorn gone. The window was unlatched, the cabin's air heavy with the scent of pine and something sharper, blood. Her heart pounded as she searched the woods, Sage at her heels, but Thorn's tracks vanished at the river's edge, as if he'd dissolved into the current. Ember and Dusk grew restless, their eyes darting to the shadows, their play replaced by a wary vigilance. Clara's dreams turned dark, filled with images of Thorn's amber eyes glowing in the void, and a voice, low, guttural, not quite human, whispering her name. She began to notice strange marks around the cabin. Claw scratches too large for bobcats, too precise for bears. Sage's growls became constant, his fur bristling at sounds Clara couldn't hear. The forest, once her sanctuary, felt like a tightening noose. She contacted the local ranger, a grizzled man named Amos, who knew the wild as well as she did. He studied the marks, his face grim. "These ain't natural," he muttered. "Something's watching you, Clara. Something that ain't just animal." That night, as a storm rolled in, lightning splitting the sky, Clara sat by the fire, Ember and Dusk pressed close. Sage stood guard by the door, his ears pricked. Then it came, a sound that froze her blood. Not a growl, not a howl, but a scream, high and piercing, like a woman's voice twisted into something otherworldly. The cubs stiffened, their eyes wide, and Sage's growl turned to a snarl. Clara grabbed the rifle, her hands shaking. The scream came again, closer, and with it, a shadow moved beyond the window, a shape too large, too wrong to be Thorn. The door rattled, the wood groaning under a weight no bobcat could muster. Clara's breath caught as she aimed the rifle, her heart thundering. The cubs hissed, their fur bristling, and Sage lunged at the door, his barks echoing into the storm. Then silence, sudden, suffocating. The shadow was gone, but Clara knew it wasn't over. Whatever was out there wanted her cubs. And it wasn't human. The storm's fury lingered in the air, a damp weight that clung to Clara's skin as she stood on the porch at dawn, the rifle still heavy in her hands. The forest was silent, unnaturally so, as if it held its breath, waiting for something to break. Ember and Dusk prowled the cabin's interior, their movements sharp and restless, their eyes flickering with a wildness Clara hadn't seen before. Sage, her steadfast guardian, limped slightly, a shallow gash on his flank from the previous night's unseen assault. Clara's gaze swept the tree line, searching for signs of the shadow that had haunted her dreams. Thorn's absence was a wound, raw and unhealing, but the greater fear was what had taken him, and what it wanted with the others. She didn't wait for answers. Clara packed a rucksack with essentials. A knife, a flare gun, a coil of rope, and the rifle. She secured the cabin, boarding the windows with old planks, and leashed Sage, though his eyes begged to run free. Ember and Dusk followed without prompting, their lithe forms slipping through the underbrush as Clara ventured into the forest. She was no fool. She knew tracking in these woods was a gamble, but the strange claw marks and Thorn's vanishing trail were her only leads. The river, where his tracks had disappeared, was her starting point. The water ran cold and swift, its surface a mirror for the gray sky above. Clara knelt, studying the bank. The mud held no new prints, but a glint caught her eye. A sliver of bone, polished and carved with intricate, spiraling patterns that seemed to pulse under her touch. It wasn't animal. It wasn't human. Her stomach churned as she pocketed it, a chill creeping up her spine. Sage's low growl pulled her attention to the trees, where a faint rustle stirred the ferns. Ember and Dusk froze, their ears pinned back, their bodies coiled like springs. Clara raised the rifle, her heart a drumbeat in her chest. The rustle became a shape, a figure, not the man from before, but something else. It moved on all fours, its form blurred by the mist, its eyes glowing like embers in a dying fire. Clara's breath hitched as it paused, head tilted, as if assessing her. Then, with a sound like tearing silk, it vanished into the undergrowth. Sage strained against the leash, but Clara held him back, her mind racing. That wasn't a bobcat. It wasn't anything she'd studied in her years as a biologist. It was wrong. She pressed on, following the faint trail of broken twigs and disturbed earth. The forest grew denser, the air thick with the scent of moss and something metallic, like blood left to dry. By midday, she reached a clearing she'd never seen, though she knew these woods like her own skin. At its center stood a ring of stones, each etched with the same spiraling patterns as the bone in her pocket. The air here was heavy, oppressive, as if the clearing existed outside time. Sage whimpered, and even Ember and Dusk hesitated, their tails low. Clara's eyes caught movement at the clearing's edge. Thorn stood there, his fur sleek and untouched, but his gaze was different, distant, almost luminous. "Thorn," she whispered, stepping forward. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge her. Instead, he turned and slipped into the trees, his form flickering like a mirage. Clara followed, her pulse hammering, the cubs and Sage at her heels. The trail led to a cave, its mouth a jagged wound in the hillside. The air grew colder, the metallic scent stronger. Clara lit a flare, its red glow casting shadows that danced like living things. Inside, the cave was vast, its walls glistening with moisture and etched with more of those spiraling runes. At its heart lay a pool, its surface black and still, reflecting nothing. And there, beside it, stood the man from the forest, his hat gone, his face revealed, gaunt, with eyes that burned like the creatures in the mist. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice a low rasp. "They're not yours anymore." Clara's grip on the rifle tightened. "Where's Thorn?" she demanded. The man's smile was a slash of teeth. "He's part of something bigger now. They all are." He gestured to the pool, and Clara's breath caught. Shadows moved beneath its surface, not reflections, but shapes, twisting and writhing, their forms half feline, half something else. Ember and Dusk hissed, backing away, but Clara felt a pull, a whisper in her mind that wasn't her own. The bone in her pocket burned against her skin. The man stepped closer, his eyes locked on the cubs. "They were never just bobcats," he said. "They're vessels. Old things sleep in these woods, and they need forms to walk again." Clara's mind reeled. She thought of Thorn's knowing gaze, the unnatural marks, the scream in the night. The forest wasn't just wild. It was alive, ancient, and hungry. Sage lunged, breaking the leash, his jaws snapping at the man. The stranger moved faster than humanly possible, his hand striking Sage with a force that sent the dog sprawling. Clara fired, the shot echoing, but the bullet passed through the man as if he were smoke. He laughed, a sound that clawed at her sanity, and the pool erupted. Shadows poured forth, their forms coalescing into creatures like the one in the mist, feline, yet grotesquely wrong, their eyes glowing with malice. Ember and Dusk leaped, their claws raking the air, but the shadows were too many. Clara fired again, the flare gun's light searing the darkness, and for a moment, the creatures recoiled. She grabbed Sage, dragging him toward the cave's mouth, the cubs at her side. But Thorn appeared, blocking their path, his eyes no longer his own. "Clara," he said, his voice a chorus of whispers, "join us." She stumbled back, her heart breaking. The man's laughter filled the cave as the shadows closed in. Clara fired the last flare, its light revealing a truth she couldn't unsee. The cubs weren't just vessels. They were keys, and the forest had chosen her to unlock something ancient, something that should never wake. With a scream of defiance, she hurled the carved bone into the pool. The water boiled, the shadows screamed, and the cave began to collapse. Clara ran, Sage and the cubs with her, as the earth shook and the forest howled. They burst into the clearing, the stones crumbling behind them. The man's laughter faded, but Thorn's absence was a weight she'd carry forever. Back at the cabin, Clara barred the door, her hands trembling. Ember and dusk curled against her, their warmth a fragile anchor. Sage's eyes met hers, steady and knowing. The forest was silent again, but Clara knew it was watching. And somewhere, in the dark, something ancient stirred, waiting for its next chance.